Next up is preferences corruption. So a lot of times some really weird things will happen, and the only way that I know how to fix them is to go in and to delete the preferences within Final Cut Pro 6 and 7. And this is something I'm sure all of you have run into before. The truth of the matter is, between these two, I've done a little bit of research, and honestly, they're both a lot more stable applications than Final Cut Pro 6 and 7. From what I've seen online and in different forums, aside from the interface issues that some people have with Final Cut Pro 10 being so different in how the editing works, both of them seem to be a lot more stable than Final Cut Pro 6 or 7, and that would make sense since they're a lot newer. The one issue that I've said before with both of these that we can run into problems with Premiere Pro is that bringing footage in from tape if you're going from DV to HD, and with Final Cut Pro 10 would be in any way, shape, or form messing with the file structure of the database outside of Final Cut Pro 10. Next up is editing gaps. So a lot of times students like to move their footage around on the timeline, like they would be moving around pictures or images on a piece of paper. This is something that I've seen a lot of students really like to do as opposed to use the keyboard shortcuts. With that comes the problems of sometimes having these small 1 to 2 frame gaps where the footage has been kind of moved. Now the reason for this is that Final Cut Pro 6 and 7 both were made for people who are doing commercials or for television productions where they really want to respect the overall time of the footage. If you delete something, it's going to leave a gap there because it's assuming that if you're doing a 30-second commercial, it wants to keep it at 30 seconds. One of the biggest improvements, I think, for our students, and one of the biggest issues a lot of professional editors have, is what's known as this liquid editing, which basically allows you to move your footage around and it will not allow you to have any gaps. It's saying if you want a gap in this footage, you're actually going to have to choose to put it in there through a menu. This, for our students, I think is great. It allows them to move the footage back and forth all around without any problems or any worries that they're going to have these small little editing chunks out of there. Now both Final Cut Pro 7 and Premiere Pro have the ability for you to go in and choose something that says get rid of gaps, but it's something that a lot of students forget is available to them. Also, with the addition of the ability to audition different clips, I think that Final Cut Pro has a lot of really great features for our students. Premiere Pro, on the other hand, is really going to stay to trying to keep and respect the overall time of the timeline. So if you delete something, it's going to leave a gap. If you're moving things around and don't butt them right next to each other, there's the ability to have the gaps as well. Once again, for our students, I think between these two, the improvements to Final Cut Pro 10 are going to be a benefit for them. A lot of times they're not making necessarily strict narrative vehicles. They're trying to see how shots would be before or after something, and the ease of use and the ease and ability to move those different clips around on the timeline, I think, are going to make them very happy, and it's going to allow them to make more productive work. Next up, and I'm sure we've run into 1 or 2 people with this every single class, you show them how to do keyframes in Final Cut Pro 6 or 7, and somebody, one of them, is going to just go off, and suddenly there is a video that's going to take multiple days to render. Or you come into a class and there is a computer with a white piece of paper taped over it that says rendering, please do not touch. And that means that either some students who maybe need to use that computer aren't going to use that computer, or they have to stop the students rendering. Both cases are bad news. Now, what Final Cut Pro 10 has done is they've pushed all of their rendering to the background. So things are always going to be rendering in the background. It's very, very good about pausing the rendering and then bring it back up if resources are needed for playback, for instance. And what it's going to do is it's basically, if it's got a very, very complex clip, it can show you stuff frame by frame, but it will choose to basically degrade the quality of the playback or eventually go choppy, as opposed to just showing you a needs to be rendered option. And both applications are using the power of these very strong video cards to help render these things out. Premiere Pro, on the other hand, does not have background rendering, but has really optimized something called the Mercury Playback Engine to make sure that things can play back in real time as much as possible. The other really big thing that it has over Final Cut Pro 10 is its strong integration with After Effects. You can actually take some clips, send them to After Effects, and do something that's known as dynamic linking. You can update these new projects in After Effects and they will automatically link back to Premiere Pro. It's a wonderful system and it's really, really fast. For those students who are really into these highly complex effects, they're going to really appreciate this option here. So between these two, for students who want to do really complex effects, I think the winner is going to be Premiere Pro with its integration with After Effects. Next is exporting. Now, there's always been a lot of confusion with students. Do I export this as a QuickTime movie? Do I use compressor? Do I use QuickTime conversion? What are all these different options? With Final Cut Pro 10, they actually have more windows than Premiere Pro. But they've made these windows into a much more graphical interface. So you can see that they can go to a regular media file, to YouTube, or even to Blue Disk, which was something I was talking about earlier. This makes it really simple for students to choose what they want to export to. On the other hand, Premiere Pro gives an amazing amount of options for export. Here's just a small part of the list, but as you can see, the amount of different options you have, which is, you can see there's like 7 or 8 different ones for Vimeo alone, is going to cause overall complexity and confusion for our students. I think they're going to be like, I just want to send something to Vimeo. Do I need to choose a 10.8p 25 or 29.97? So in my opinion, between these two, even though there's a few more actual windows, the ease and clarity with the exporting for Final Cut Pro 10 wins out. The next few things are things that are actually done by our students in camera. So let's start off with unsteady shots. No matter how much we tell our students that they need to use a tripod, sometimes they're just going to get so much into the shooting that they're going to forget, or they just don't want to put it on a tripod. So we have some different options. What Final Cut Pro 10 chooses to do is, when you're inputting your footage, it gives you this list of different things you can check, including video and audio options, to analyze, to fix problems with them. One of those is stabilization. Premiere Pro also has something called a warp stabilizer, which works very well. I've tested both of them and they stabilize things out just about as good both ways. It's a tie between the two. The warp stabilizer is something that's basically saying, I'm not going to take the time in the front end to analyze these shots. I'm just going to assume that you're going to know which needs to be steadied, and then I will steady it for you. You can apply this effect afterwards. So with these two, I think it's really a tie. I would give a slight edge to Final Cut Pro 10 just because it automatically analyzes it ahead of time and in the background, and then all you need to do is just click on the steady clip and it will do it for you. With both of these, when you have to steady a shot that's kind of got a little bit of jiggle and jitter to it, it's going to crop it in just a little bit. So this automatically shows you what the crop in is. Bad audio. This is something else that can just happen because a lot of our students are one-man bands or whatever. So both applications, Final Cut Pro 10 and Premiere Pro through Adobe Audition, have the ability to go in and clean up these things. I would give, once again, just a little bit of an edge to Final Cut Pro 10 because it analyzes the stuff ahead of time and fixes it for you, as opposed to making the student recognize it and fix it. Something else that students are going to run into is this footage that's out of focus. Now, unfortunately, neither application has a good solution to this, and really nothing has a good solution to this other than people shooting stuff in focus.